Sometimes the kindness we showed animals returns to us in ways we never expect. A young farmer once saved a weak newborn calf during a storm. Years later, a massive flood destroyed his farm. Everyone thought he had died, but rescuers later found him alive on a hill because the cow he once saved had come back for him. In the quiet countryside of Iowa, where endless cornfields stretch toward the horizon and the wind carries the scent of fresh soil, lived a young farmer named Daniel Harper. Daniel was only 24, but life had already tested him more than most people his age. 2 years earlier, his parents had passed away unexpectedly, leaving him alone to care for the small family farm. It wasn't a large farm, just a modest piece of land with an old red barn, a weathered farmhouse, a few chickens, and several cattle grazing across the pasture. But to Daniel, that farm meant everything. Every fence post had been built by his father. Every tree had been planted by his mother. And every morning when the sun rose over the fields, Daniel felt like they were still there with him, so he worked hard. Before sunrise, he fed the animals. During the day, he repaired fences and tended the crops. At night, he sat quietly on the porch, listening to the wind move across the fields. Life was simple, but it was honest. And it was home. One rainy spring evening, dark storm clouds rolled over the countryside. Thunder rumbled across the fields. Rain began to fall harder and harder, drumming loudly on the barn roof. Daniel walked across the pasture to check on the cattle before the storm grew worse. As he moved through the muddy field, he suddenly heard something strange. A weak sound, almost like crying. He stopped and listened carefully. There it was again, a faint, trembling call. Daniel followed the sound toward the far corner of the pasture. And that's when he saw her. A newborn calf lay in the mud. Small, shivering, barely able to move. The storm had separated her from her mother. Rain soaked her thin fur. Her breathing was weak. Daniel immediately knelt beside her. "Hey there, easy now," he whispered gently. The calf tried to move but collapsed again. Without hesitation, Daniel removed his jacket and wrapped the calf inside it. Then he lifted her carefully into his arms. The rain poured harder as he carried the tiny animal across the field and back toward the barn. Mud clung to his boots, wind pushed against him, but Daniel didn't stop. Inside the barn, he laid the calf on a pile of dry hay. He lit a lantern, then he spent the entire night beside her. He dried her fur with old towels. He warmed milk on a small stove and fed her slowly, and every few minutes, he spoke softly to keep her calm. "Come on, little one, you can make it." Outside, the storm raged, but inside the barn, a quiet fight for life continued. Hour after hour passed. Finally, just as the first light of morning slipped through the barn windows, the calf struggled onto her feet. Daniel let out a deep breath. A smile spread across his tired face. "You did it," he said softly. He named her Willow. From that day forward, Willow never forgot him. While the other cattle wandered across the pasture, Willow stayed close to Daniel. If he walked across the field, she followed. If he repaired the barn roof, she stood nearby watching. If he sat by the fence at sunset, Willow would quietly lie down beside him. Neighbors often laughed when they saw it. "That cow thinks she's a dog," they joked. But Daniel only smiled, because to him, Willow wasn't just livestock. She was family. Years passed. Willow grew from a fragile calf into a large, powerful cow with thick brown fur and calm, intelligent eyes. But her loyalty never changed. Whenever Daniel entered the pasture, Willow was always the first to greet him. Sometimes she even nudged him gently with her nose as if saying hello. And on quiet evenings, Daniel often leaned against her while watching the sun disappear behind the fields. It was a simple life, but it was a good one. Then one summer, the sky darkened in a way no one expected. Heavy rain began to fall across the region. At first, people didn't worry. Rain was common during the season. But the storm didn't stop. For 3 straight days, the clouds poured water onto the land. Rivers swelled. Streams overflowed. The soil became soaked and unstable. Late one night, the nearby river finally burst its banks. Water rushed into the farmland like a moving wall. Fences collapsed. Fields disappeared under dark, swirling currents. When Daniel stepped outside, his boots were already sinking into water. He grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the pasture. The cattle were panicking. The water kept rising. Daniel quickly opened the gates, trying to guide the animals toward higher ground. "Come on. Move," he shouted over the roar of the storm. Lightning flashed across the sky. The current pushed harder against his legs. And then suddenly Daniel slipped. The muddy ground vanished beneath him. The rushing water dragged him across the flooded field. He slammed into a broken fence post and managed to grab it. But the current pulled violently at his body. The freezing water soaked his clothes. His hands began to lose strength. Daniel looked around. The farm was disappearing under the flood, and in that moment, a terrible thought crossed his mind. No one knows where I am. No one will find me here. The water continued to rise. Daniel's grip began to weaken, and just as he thought he could no longer hold on, he heard something, a sound cutting through the wind and rain. A loud, deep moan. Daniel blinked, unsure if he imagined it. Then the sound came again. Closer this time, through the rushing floodwater. A large shape moved toward him. It was Willow. Step by step, Willow pushed through the powerful current. Water splashed against her body. But she kept moving. Her hooves dug into the muddy ground as she fought the rushing flood. Daniel stared in disbelief. "Willow," he whispered weakly. The cow stopped beside him. She lowered her body slightly, bracing herself against the current. Instinctively, Daniel wrapped his arms around her neck. "Easy, girl. Easy." Slowly, Willow turned toward a small hill behind the pasture. Every step was a battle. The water pushed against them. Mud tried to pull them down, but Willow kept walking. Slowly, steadily, relentlessly. Minutes felt like hours. But finally, they reached the slope of the hill. The water grew shallower. Daniel collapsed onto the wet grass beside her. He lay there breathing heavily, staring up at the stormy sky. Alive. Willow stood beside him quietly, watching, protecting. At dawn, rescue teams searched the flooded farms. They expected the worst. Many animals had been swept away. Homes were damaged. Fields destroyed. When rescuers reached the hill behind Daniel's farm, they saw something they would never forget. Daniel sat on the grass, exhausted, and beside him stood Willow. The two survivors leaned quietly against each other. One of the rescuers whispered in disbelief that Cal just saved her life. Daniel gently rested his hand on Willow's neck. The same fragile calf he once carried through a storm had now carried him through one. News of the story spread across the entire town. People visited the farm just to see Willow. Children brought apples. Neighbors repaired Daniel's fences, and every time someone asked if the story was really true, Daniel simply smiled and said, "Kindness has a way of coming back." Even years later, whenever Daniel walked across the fields, Willow still followed beside him, just like the day she was born, just like the night she was saved. And just like the night she returned a favor, the compassion we show to others, human or animal, often returns to us when life tests us the most. Kindness is never wasted. Sometimes it simply waits until the moment we need it most. If you once saved an animal's life, would you believe it might someday return the favor?